Today on Ancient DOS Games, we're doing Terminal Velocity. Now this is a game that probably a lot of you have heard of but haven't really played. It's not that there's anything wrong with this game, it's actually a pretty fun game, but there's not really anything about it that stands out. It's pretty much an average game when it comes down to it, but it still has some good points and some interesting points as well, and we'll get into those. But first, let's take a look at the game stats. Terminal Velocity was developed by Terminal Reality Incorporated and published by 3D Realms in 1995. It's a 1 to 8 player flight-based first-person shooter. It has 256 color graphics, either using a 320 by 200 VGA mode or a 640 by 480 SVGA mode. Though I should probably note that the SVGA mode actually doubles the vertical resolution of the pixels, so it actually ends up being more like 640 by 240. You don't really notice it that much. The game supports multiple sound cards, and I recommend you just set it to Sound Blaster for simplicity's sake. And as for its release date, it's still shareware, but getting the game is pretty easy. Just go to www.buy3drealms.com and you can easily find a purchase for it for $6, at least at the time of this recording. Now, it's also possible that you don't exactly remember this game the way you think you do, because there was actually a game that came out just a few months afterwards called Fury 3, and it's basically made by the same people and uses the same game engine. But the reason why you might think of Fury 3 instead of Terminal Velocity is that Fury 3 was almost a launch title for Windows 95. In fact, it came out just a few days later, and Terminal Velocity came out just a few months before Windows 95. So you put that all together, and people are either going to remember Fury 3 because they were really into the whole Windows 95 thing, or they're going to remember Terminal Velocity because they wanted to stay away from Windows 95 as much as possible. So that's basically why you might get those two confused. And there was also another game using the same game engine called Hellbender, and I think that came out about a year later. Not 100% certain on that, but you get the idea. So the story goes, it's the year 2704, the perimeter defense computers equipped on all of the major planetary bodies have stopped responding and are launching attacks on Earth. Oh, fun. So you're apparently flying this specially designed aircraft or spacecraft, I don't think that's really clear about that, but you're flying it through various areas and you're trying to destroy all the things that are making these perimeter defense computers go crazy, and then try and figure out why they've gone crazy and then destroy that too. And apparently this ship you're flying is so difficult to fly that nobody else can fly it. It's considered to be suicide to fly this thing, but actually the controls in this game are pretty good. So I don't know what they're talking about, but let's just roll with it. So as you can see on screen, the gameplay is pretty simple. You just fly straight forwards all the time, shoot your weapons, and just dodge everything that tries to shoot back at you. The controls are pretty simple. You have controls for turning left and right, pitching up and down, rolling to the sides, and you also have a throttle control, so you're always moving forwards at a particular rate. You can't stop, and you can't strafe to the sides or anything. So you're always going forwards at a rate. So it's kind of like an aircraft in that sense, but you have such great control over exactly where you're aiming that it's kind of not like an aircraft. I don't know, it's kind of hard to explain. But when you actually pick up and play the game, you'll note that it is really simple to play this game. So it actually plays even better though if you have a joystick, because with a joystick you have rudder control and throttle control as well. So having a joystick with this game really makes the gameplay even better. Actually, there's a lot of games on the PC that are really good for playing with a joystick. It's not like the console where you're generally working with a particular controller layout and you have to make sure that the game will play properly with that controller. On the PC, there wasn't really that kind of standardization, and not to mention keyboards have 100 keys plus. So when you look to the PC for gaming, you generally see a lot more games that have really good joystick support and have very fluent kinds of joystick controls, like having a full joystick with a hat, with rudder controls, with a throttle, or even more stuff than that. So the PC was a good platform for joystick-based games. And this is one of those games where if you have a joystick, you're going to get a lot of enjoyment out of it. I wish I could say that this game was one of the first ones to incorporate a sort of rolling landscape that you go across, with hills and stuff, but It kind of isn't, because like I mean, there were games that came out before this one with landscapes in 3D. Magic Carpet's the first one that comes to mind because it came out a whole year before this game. But this one does it pretty well too, though, and it also incorporates the idea of flying through tunnels. So you'd actually have tunnel entrances on the ground, and then when you go into the tunnel, you now have to fly through this very narrow tunnel, making sure to dodge any obstacles that come your way and shoot anything that shoots back at you. And speaking of shooting things, there's actually, well, okay, there's 7 different weapons you can use in this game, but really you're only going to be using 2 of them for the most part, but let's just go over all of them anyways. The first weapon is the PAC, or Plasma Assault Cannon. Now this weapon is, it does the job. Like, I mean, you have infinite ammo with it when you start off with it, but you can also pick up additional PAC power-ups, which give you 100 shots of a more powerful version, either firing 2 shots at the same time, or if you pick up another one while you have the dual shot, you get to fire 4 shots at a time. And that's actually one of the tricks with this game, is with the PAC or with the RTL weapons, you want to make sure that you never run out of ammo with them once you actually get them upgraded to the greater versions, because if you run out of ammo once you've upgraded them, you go back down to a single shot, and that's not fun. So you want to try and preserve your ammo for these weapons once you actually get them upgraded. The next weapon is the Ion Burst Cannon, simply referred to as Ion generally, and when you pick one up you get 100 shots with it, and it does okay damage, but the thing is that it fires in this weird sort of spreading pattern. It's really hard to hit things with it. So my best recommendation for using this weapon is if you have like a group of enemies coming up behind you or something, do an afterburner jump straight forwards, then cut your engines to 0, swing around, and then just shoot the ion cannon right at all the enemies that are coming towards you. And that generally is a good way of using the ion burst cannon for getting rid of all those enemies that are grouping up behind you over the course of the game. The next weapon is the RTL, or Rapid Targeting Laser. Now this weapon is basically just a faster version of the PAC. The shots move a lot faster, so it's much easier to hit things with it. And you actually will also find more RTL power-ups than you will PAC power-ups for some obscure reason. So generally speaking, the RTL is pretty easy to keep upgraded once you have it up to the quad shot. The next weapon are the MAMs, or Manually Aimed Missiles. Now, these come in packs of 40, and they do okay damage. Like, I mean, you can destroy most of the really hardened targets in 4 hits with these missiles, and almost every other target will go down in just 1. But you really have to make sure you aim these properly, because, after all, you only get 40 missiles, and there's also a bit of a delay between each missile being fired. Ultimately, they don't really have the same effectiveness as the PAC or the RTL, but using these missiles or any of the other weapons I'm about to describe are a good way to save your ammo for the PAC and the RTLs, because those are the weapons that you're going to be using the most, and you want to keep them upgraded to their quad shots for as long as you can. Next are the SADs, or the Seek and Destroy missiles. Now these are basically just MAMs that home in on targets. There's not really much more I can say about them. They do the same damage, though if you want more damage from a homing weapon, then you go for the SWTs, or the Shockwave Torpedoes, which also come in packs of 20 but do 4 times as much damage as the MAMs or SADs. The only problem is that for some reason I find the Shockwave Torpedoes are really hard to aim for some reason. Don't know why. It's like they want to lock onto targets that are not the targets you want them to lock onto, whereas the SADs, I never have problems with them, so I don't know. Maybe the SWTs are just not user-friendly or something. The last weapon are the DAMs, or Discrete Annihilation Missiles. Though they don't really look like missiles, they just look like this blossoming, pulsing orb thing. I don't know. Anyways, the DAMs, they only come in packs of 1, and you can only hold 1 at a time. And the reason for this is that when you activate one of these, everything around you dies. Well, okay. If they're really, really like strong, high hit points and everything, they won't die, but they've got to be pretty darn strong targets. Almost anything just goes down in a flash with this weapon. And also on top of that though, it also acts as a full restore for your shields. So even if there's like no enemies around you or something and you really desperately need shields, this weapon will recharge your shields for some reason. I have no idea why. Maybe it just absorbs all the shielding from the enemies it destroys or something. But in any case, it's always a good idea as well to remember where you find any DAM power-ups, because since you can only carry 1 at a time, if you use it, it's a good idea to trail back and pick up one that you may have left behind. And just to quickly go over the other power-ups that you can find in the power containers, you have shield restores, which restore your shielding to maximum, though they won't work if you're only missing just a couple pixels of shields. You know, save them for when you really need them. You have power cores, which you don't actually find in the containers, the enemies drop them, and they restore just a little bit of your shields. You have afterburners, which are used to make yourself go really fast, so you can either use it to get away from enemies shooting at you, or you can use it to get places. You also have invisibility power-ups, which I don't really know if they do anything in the main game. Like, I mean, every time I pick them up, it seems the enemies just keep firing at me anyways, so I don't know. But the invincibility power-ups do work, and they basically make you invincible for about 30 seconds. And yeah, the invisibility power-ups work for about 30 seconds as well, supposedly. So now that we got the power-ups out of the way, let's talk about the worlds themselves. Now, each world that you visit has 3 levels that you have to get through, and at the end of the 3rd level, you'll fight a boss. And once you destroy the boss, you can exit the level and proceed to the next world. And each chapter of the game, because there's actually 3 chapters in the game, and each one has 3 worlds that you can go to. So that makes sense. You got 9 worlds in total split across 3 chapters. And in the shareware version, you only have access to the first chapter. So when you buy the game, then you get the other 2 chapters as well. Now, the first world, Ymir, is sort of like an introductory to the game. The enemies aren't really that good at shooting things. They're going to miss you a lot, and there's not really too many things to do in each level. Plus, the tunnel runs are not that difficult either. So this is a world just to sort of get you into the game and get you into the controls. There's one thing I should note. In the second level, there's a tunnel that you don't have to go through, but if you do go through it, you can get a lot of Afterburner power-ups, and the power-ups in this game in the tunnels actually respawn when you go through the tunnels a second or third time. So whenever you need, whenever you want to have a lot of a certain kind of power-up and you know a tunnel that you can get it from, make sure you go through that tunnel several times and you'll get more and more of those power-ups. The second world, Cryanthia, is sort of an interesting place. Like, I mean, most of it takes place in these canyons that you're going through, and, you know, it actually feels like you're in between the walls of this big canyon and such. And at the end of the second level is probably the only point in the game where you actually have a lot to do above the clouds. Because, yeah, those clouds aren't a wall. You can actually go above the cloud cover in this game. After Cryanthia comes the Moon Dagger. Now, the Moon Dagger isn't really a world so much as it is a really big freaking missile headed right for Earth, and you gotta stop it before it just destroys the whole planet. Now, of course, some people here might say that's a good thing, but no. In this game, you gotta save the Earth. So, getting through the Moon Dagger isn't really that difficult. Like, I mean, most of the targets you have to destroy in this place only take like 1 hit, so it kind of seems like it would be a really flimsy weapon, sort of, if you can destroy it that easily. I don't know. Now, the Moon Dagger is actually the last part of the first chapter of the game, so to play the rest of the game, you have to actually buy the registered version. And when you do, the next world that you go to is Tatehangup. And this world is sort of like this, I don't know, it's basically just a desert, but there's a lot of flying you gotta do in these places because everything is just scattered everywhere. Made worse by the fact that there isn't a single Afterburner power-up in the entire planet. So if you're just starting the chapter and you're not coming in from the previous chapter with all your power-ups and everything, you're gonna have to spend a lot of time just flying between everything because there's no Afterburner power-ups. This particular world really needs Afterburner power-ups. Once you get to the next world of Sisho though, not only do you find Afterburner power-ups, but the enemies can drop them. So, you know, that's going to make it much easier to get around. And this planet is more sort of, it's kind of like a volcanic planet. Like, there's volcanoes spewing fire into the air, and even the sky is all fiery. It's kind of menacing in a sort of way, though most of the targets aren't too difficult to destroy, and again, there's a lot of targets to destroy. Once you get to the second chapter and the third chapter of this game, the game gets much bigger. There's a lot more stuff to do. It's not like the first chapter of the game where in each of the levels it's a pretty clear set path where you gotta go, or there's not really that much to do. In the later chapters in this game, there's a lot to do, and the game gets quite a bit longer to actually get through. Then finally, at the end of the second chapter, you reach the planet Ergo, and this place is kind of interesting. Like, I mean, First of all, it's pitch black in the distance, just like on the Moon Dagger, but instead of being on a steel surface, you now have, grassy areas and these sort of tech platforms set up and everything. And the tunnels in this level are kind of like a labyrinth. They actually go to like little areas that are sort of interconnected with each other, and you can even go backwards through some of the same tunnels, which is not something you can really do in a lot of the levels in this game. So it's an interesting and confusing place, especially the last level where you have to go through several tunnels just to find the one that you're supposed to fight the boss in. Then you finally get to the third chapter, and here in the very first world, Centauri III, you have quite a task on your hands. There's these enemy boats that are in the water in this planet, and this planet's sort of like a whole bunch of little islands and stuff, but these boats have really good accuracy with their rapid targeting lasers, which means if you don't shoot them at a distance and then dodge immediately, they're easily going to take you down, especially since they do a lot of damage as well. So this is where things start to get really difficult. That said, it's not like the first part of the second chapter where you don't get any Afterburner power-ups. Here, you do get Afterburners. The second part of this chapter actually takes place on an asteroid of all places. Happens to be the Ceres asteroid. And I believe most of you know where that asteroid is about now, since we've had all that news of Pluto no longer being a planet and everything. But when you're actually on this asteroid, you see a lot of other little mini asteroids falling down and sort of trying to destroy you. They're impossible to dodge, so it's like, I don't even know why they're there, but it's sort of like there's certain areas that they appear in, so when you go into those areas, you just want to get through them as fast as possible so you're not crushed by all these little asteroids raining upon you. And then you finally get to a Dyson Sphere? And it's called Proxima 7? Wait a minute. That means there were 6 of these before this one? Where did we even get the material to put all them together? Well, in any case, Proxima 7 is the last location you go to, and it's got this sort of like technical landscape going on. It's got all these like tech patterns and everything. And the last boss of this particular world is, okay, I don't want to spoil it for anyone, but let's just say the last boss of this game is really weird. How can I put this in a way that won't spoil it? Okay. Any of you who have played Doom 2 and have cheated in the last level of the game have probably noticed that the target that you're supposed to hit through that opening is actually Jean Romero's head. That's the kind of weird we're talking about here. So you're just gonna have to see it to believe it, but just trust me, it's a really weird boss. But once you destroy it, you get out of the level, you beat the game, and there you go. You actually also get a secret code to play a very special world that has a whole bunch of things to destroy, and it's, I don't know, it's kind of like a throwaway level, but it's interesting nonetheless. Well, that's basically it, so all I gotta talk about now is how to actually get this game working best in DOSBox. Now, if you actually buy this game, you'll note that the installer automatically installs DOSBox and everything necessary to just make the game run right out of the installer, but the default settings it uses for DOSBox aren't exactly the best for this game. So here's what I recommend you do to the settings to make this game work its best. Firstly, make sure you set the cycles count to max, because this game is going to need as much processing power as you can give it to give you a good frame rate. And also, you want to make sure you increase the memory size. DOSBox defaults its memory size to 16. I recommend you increase it to 24 because 16 is the absolute minimum that this game needs to run properly at its highest settings. So, just in case, it's better to have it set to a higher level. And you also want to make sure that you set the mixer rate and the sound card rates to the same rate that you choose in the game. It's kind of interesting that this is one of the few games where you can actually change the frequency that the sound is being played at in the game. Not a lot of games did that. I'm kind of curious why this one chose to, but just make sure they match, and that way you're not wasting any processing power or conversions or anything like that. Next, make sure you turn the graphics filters off because there's really no point to using them. The game runs at a high enough resolution that the graphics filters, they don't really do much. Like, I mean, you can turn them on if you want to, but it's really just going to be mostly just a waste of processing power. Though if you have a joystick though, here's something that you have to do. Make sure you turn timed intervals for the joystick off. If you don't turn this setting off, the controls are going to be very erratic with the joystick. So make sure you turn that off if you're going to use a joystick. And one final thing I'll note, this isn't really a setting you have to worry about, but just something to keep in mind is that when you actually get to the level 5.2 in the registered version, there's a particular tunnel that will crash the game if you go through it. So you don't actually have to go through it. Basically, there's this one tunnel you go through and you enter this room that has a couple containers in it. And there'll be tunnels to the left and right of you. Make sure you take the left tunnel, because the right tunnel from that room will crash the game. And that's all for this episode of Ancient DOS Games. Stay tuned for episode 6. I'll be reviewing a Breakout clone. You need more of a hint than that to guess, don't you? Okay? A Breakout clone that only uses OPL3 sound. That should be enough of a hint, and if it's not, then you're just gonna have to stay tuned.